All right, so get ready because today we are diving into some pretty, let's just say, controversial ideas about power, history, and how societies work.
Yeah, we're going to be unpacking some seriously thought-provoking stuff.
We are. And to do that, we're cracking open Prince of This World.
Yeah.
It's written by Grigory Klimov.
And what makes this even more, I guess, intriguing is that Klimov himself was a Soviet defector.
Right.
So he's coming at all this from a perspective that most Western authors wouldn't.
Totally.
I mean, he's raising questions that a lot of folks just wouldn't even touch.
Exactly. And that perspective, I think, is what makes this book so fascinating. So the book's main argument, and this is where it gets like really interesting, is that there's a certain type of person who Klimov labels as quote unquote degenerate, who ends up in positions of power. And not only do they end up in these positions, but they kind of end up dictating world events, shaping the course of history.
Yeah, he even argues that there's like this deliberate, organized effort to put these people in charge.
Right, and it really makes you wonder, like, what exactly does Klimov mean by degenerate? It's not a word you hear every day. And his definition is, well, pretty unique.
Yeah, it's definitely going to raise some eyebrows. He defines it as having these, like, 3 stages: sexual perversions, mental illness, and birth defects.
And he argues that they're all connected, that you can actually trace these things through family lines and see how these patterns repeat themselves.
Like across generations.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, show me your family tree and I'll tell you your future.
Right, and he actually does this in the book. He analyzes the family histories of some really well-known figures like Lenin, even George Washington.
He does. He pulls in all these examples pointing to cases of suicide, mental illness, lack of children as evidence for this degeneration.
He even uses the Kinsey report, you know, that really famous study about sexual behavior, to back up his claims about how common these so-called perversions are.
It's a bold move.
It is.
I mean, he's pulling together all these different threads to build this like massive case for this really out there theory. And it's important to remember as we go through this, we are not saying we agree with any of this. We're just, you know, unpacking the claims in the book and letting you, the listener, decide what to make of it all.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the context, too. You know, Klimov is writing all this during the Cold War.
Right.
And he's escaped from the Soviet Union. So he's deeply suspicious of, you know, both the communist system and the Western power structures. He sees hidden agendas and manipulation everywhere.
It's like he's looking at the world through this lens of, like, deep distrust.
Exactly.
And that leads us to one of his most I guess, attention-grabbing arguments.
Yeah.
He looks at groups like the Freemasons,
Yeah.
Illuminati, even Rotary clubs.
Yeah.
And he argues that they're all being used to identify and promote certain types of people.
The people who fit that specific degenerate profile.
Exactly.
It's playing into that whole classic conspiracy theory.
For sure.
But Klimov connects it very explicitly to his theory of degeneration.
Yeah, he's not just saying, oh, there are these secret societies. He's saying they are deliberately looking for these types of people to put into leadership positions.
And it gets even more interesting because he brings in this real CIA project called the Harvard Project, which studied Lenin's personality. Yeah. And he uses it as, like, evidence for his theory. He even connects it to the Kennedy assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right. And this is where he really starts to blur the lines between historical analysis and, like, pure speculation.
He's weaving together real events with, you know, his own interpretations, which creates this narrative that's, you know, both fascinating and kind of unnerving at the same time.
Totally. And then there's his fixation on the number 13.
Oh, yeah.
He thinks it has this deep hidden significance. He finds it everywhere, from ancient calendars to Article 58 of the Soviet Legal Code, which dealt with political crimes. He even points to Tolstoy having 13 children. It's like he's seeing these secret codes and messages everywhere.
It all feeds back into his belief in these hidden agendas and this knowledge that most people just aren't privy to.
Right, like there's this hidden truth that he's trying to expose.
Right.
And speaking of hidden things, he describes this so-called 13th department within the NKVD, the Soviet secret police.
Right.
Which, as far as we know, never actually existed.
Yeah, as far as anyone knows.
But in the book, it plays a central role. This department is led by the main character, Maxim Rudnev, and they focus on researching things like witchcraft, occultism, and different religious sects.
It's like he's taking us down this rabbit hole of espionage, secret societies, and forbidden knowledge.
Exactly. And it's really interesting how he blends fact and fiction.
He uses this made-up department to explore his ideas about, the occult and its influence on power.
Right. And it makes you wonder, where does history end and Klimov's imagination begin? I mean...
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, how much of this is based on, actual events versus, like, his own...
Interpretation.
His interpretation, exactly.
Right.
And that leads us to another key piece of this whole puzzle, which is Klimov's views on religion.
Yeah, he's got some pretty strong opinions there.
He does. And he makes some bold claims, especially about a degenerate sect, which he says has basically distorted religious teachings, particularly around this concept of a chosen people.
And again, we want to be really careful here because these claims can be easily misinterpreted.
Totally.
And they can be used in really harmful ways.
Absolutely. And he connects this to this idea of good versus bad degenerates.
Right.
And he uses examples like, books, for example, like The Gadfly, to show how even the children of good degenerates can undo, like, all of the good work that their parents have done.
So it's like there's this potential for darkness that's passed down through generations.
Exactly. Regardless of, like, your own personal choices, you could still be carrying this taint.
It's a really thought-provoking idea.
It is. It makes you think about, like, the nature of good and evil and, how much control we actually have over our own destinies.
It's like he's saying there's this battle going on, this cosmic struggle.
And we're all caught in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from those big philosophical questions.
Definitely not. He dives right in.
He does. And I think that's what makes Prince of This World such a fascinating and challenging read.
For sure.
It forces you to think about these things in a completely different way.
Absolutely.
And whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that he makes you think.
And that's a valuable thing in itself, right?
Absolutely.
Just to be challenged, to have your assumptions questioned.
I think that's a good place to pause for now and let everyone absorb all of this. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to unpack in Klimov's world. Make sure to come back for part 2, where we'll dig even deeper into his theories and explore his vision of the future.
It's going to get wild.
It is. It's going to get wild. See you next time.
Welcome back. Let's jump right back into Klimov's world. Remember we were talking about how he portrays the cyclical nature of power.
Oh, yeah, like how those who climb to the top are almost destined to, like, be destroyed by the very system they create.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating is that he doesn't just blame, like, individual ambition or ruthlessness.
Right.
He really links it back to that whole idea of degeneration being prevalent among those who seek power in the first place.
So it's not just that, like, power corrupts, it's that corrupted people seek power.
Exactly. It's like this inherent weakness that both draws them to power and ultimately leads to their downfall.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and to illustrate this, he uses the example of the NKVD.
Oh, right, the Soviet secret police.
Yeah, I mean, this was the organization that carried out some of the most brutal purges during Stalin's reign.
Right, millions killed or sent to labor camps.
But then think about it. Many of the NKVD's own members ended up being purged themselves.
Yeah, it's like they created this machine of repression and then ended up as victims of it.
Yeah, and Klimov argues that, the very traits that made these degenerates attractive for positions of power.
Like the lust for control, the willingness to use violence.
Exactly. Those same traits ultimately lead to their destruction.
Fascinating. And he doesn't limit this to just the Soviet Union. Klimov suggests that we see similar patterns in Western societies, too.
Oh, absolutely. He sees evidence of this rise of what he calls, vile degenerates who manipulate systems for their own gain, even in democracy.
It's like this universal law of power, almost.
Right. And remember, Klimov's background is important here.
Right. He's a former Soviet defector.
Exactly. So he's deeply distrustful of both the communist system and Western power structures.
He sees corruption and hidden motives everywhere.
Everywhere. And he's not afraid to connect the dots, even if those connections might seem a little far-fetched.
Yeah, like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, exactly. But he does it with such conviction that it's hard to just completely ignore it.
And one of the most, striking examples of this is how he analyzes the Great Purge in the Soviet Union.
Oh, yeah, in the 1930s.
When millions were killed or sent to labor camps.
Right, a really dark period.
Most historians view it as Stalin consolidating his power.
But Klimov has a different take.
What does he say?
He argues that it was a manifestation of the degeneration that's inherent in the revolutionary process itself.
So it's not just about one man's ambition, it's about the nature of revolution itself.
Exactly. He suggests that revolution, unleashes this wave of violence and repression that ends up consuming even its own architects.
Like Yezhov and Yagoda.
Yeah, powerful men who orchestrated the purges only to become victims themselves.
Makes you think.
It does.
But Klimov goes even further.
He does.
Oh yeah, he suggests that the Great Purge wasn't just this historical event. He sees it as a reflection of this deeper spiritual battle between good and evil playing out on the world stage.
A cosmic battle.
Yeah, and this is where his theories about the occult and secret societies really start to come into play.
Right, it all starts to weave together.
He sees the Great Purge as the work of the devil, like a deliberate effort to sow chaos and destruction.
So it's not just Stalin, it's something more sinister.
Exactly. And it compares the purges to, the witch hunts of the Middle Ages.
Oh, wow.
Suggesting that both were motivated by this desire to eliminate those who pose a threat to the established order.
It makes you wonder about, the forces that have been at play behind some of history's darkest chapters.
It really does. And it makes you wonder if, is this just ancient history, or could this happen again?
That's a scary thought.
It is. Klimov seems to think it could.
He does.
He sees evidence of this decline in traditional values.
Right.
The rise of moral relativism.
Okay.
And the increasing influence of degenerates in positions of power, even in the West.
Yeah, some people accuse him of, cherry-picking examples and misinterpreting data to fit his narrative.
Right.
But even if you don't agree with everything he's saying...
I think he makes some really interesting points about, the nature of power.
For sure.
The potential for corruption, and whether these cycles of rise and fall are just an inevitable part of human history.
It's a big question, and I think it's one that we need to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely, and we are going to continue to grapple with that question in part 3, so make sure to come back.
We're going to dive even deeper into Klimov's world.
We are. It's going to get wild. All right, so we've gone pretty deep into Prince of This World by Grigory Klimov, exploring his really intense ideas about power and this concept of quote-unquote degeneration and the forces he thinks are shaping our world. Now let's talk about what he sees for the future.
Yeah, Klimov definitely doesn't shy away from those big questions, does he?
Not at all. And one of the things that struck me was this idea that this degeneration isn't just a personal thing.
Like a character flaw?
Yeah, it's more like a contagious disease, something that spreads through society, across generations even.
He makes it sound like even if you manage to avoid it yourself, your children might not be so lucky.
Right, like it's this inherited curse almost.
And Klimov doesn't just blame individuals for this either.
Right.
He sees it as a systemic problem, something that comes from social structures and these cultural trends that reward ambition and ruthlessness.
So the system itself is built to create more of these degenerates.
Exactly.
And he uses the Soviet Union as a prime example of this.
Right, because the revolution, even though it might have started with noble intentions, it ultimately created this this breeding ground for this degeneration that corrupted the whole system.
Because it attracted the wrong kind of people, right? People who were drawn to violence.
Exactly.
And who were willing to do whatever it took to get ahead.
It's almost like a virus, right? It just keeps spreading and replicating.
And Klimov doesn't limit this just to communist systems, right? He sees the same patterns in Western democracies, too.
Yeah, absolutely. He sees evidence of this degeneration spreading in more subtle and insidious ways.
Like how?
Well, he points to things like the rise of consumerism, the decline of religious belief, and this increasing focus on individual gratification over the common good.
So it's like these cultural shifts are making us more vulnerable to this degeneration.
Yeah, and he links these trends to some really serious consequences.
Like what?
Well, he talks about rising crime rates, social unrest, political instability, even war.
And he makes it sound like we're headed for a collapse.
It's definitely a bleak picture, and this is where we see his apocalyptic worldview.
Oh, yeah.
He believes that we're living in the end times.
Like a biblical prophecy coming true.
Exactly. It's not just a social or political problem for him. It's a full-blown spiritual crisis.
So are we doomed? Is that what he's saying?
Not necessarily. He does offer a glimmer of hope.
Okay, so what's the solution?
He believes that it starts with a spiritual awakening, a return to traditional values, and a rejection of all this materialistic and self-centered thinking that he sees as so corrupting.
So it's more than just changing laws or policies.
Right. It's a fundamental shift in our values.
Back to basics, almost.
In a way.
And he also emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility.
Like, we can't just wait for someone else to fix this.
Yeah, it's on each of us to resist those temptations.
The temptations of power, greed.
To focus on things like humility, compassion, putting others first.
Exactly. And Klimov's vision for the future is one where, individuals and societies are guided by these strong moral principles.
Yeah.
Where power is used responsibly, not just to benefit the few.
It sounds pretty idealistic.
It is.
I mean, is it even possible?
That's a good question. But even if it seems a little far-fetched, you have to admire his conviction,
Yeah.
This belief that we are capable of better.
Okay, so one last thing I want to touch on, and this is probably the most controversial part of the book, is Klimov's theory about this degenerate sect that he thinks is like secretly working to undermine society and bring about their own twisted version of a new world order.
Yeah, he really goes there, doesn't he?
It's a lot. And, we have to be careful here because these kinds of ideas can be really dangerous.
Absolutely. They can be used to justify all sorts of prejudice and discrimination.
Exactly. And it seems like Klimov is trying to expose what he sees as like hypocrisy and manipulation within certain groups.
Yeah, but his language is, it's inflammatory.
So who are these people that he's talking about? What's their goal?
Well, he describes them as this secret group of individuals who are driven by a lust for power, by hatred of humanity, and this desire to just destroy everything good in the world.
It sounds almost too evil to be true.
Right. And a lot of people do write him off as just paranoid.
But he's very specific, isn't he?
He traces their influence through history, linking them to different events and movements. He even claims they're behind wars and revolutions.
Wow.
It's like they're master manipulators, pulling the strings from the shadows.
So where does he see their influence today?
Everywhere, basically. The media, entertainment, education, government, even religion.
It's like they're trying to break down all the systems that hold society together.
Create chaos so they can seize control.
It's a pretty scary thought, even if you don't believe in this, like secret cabal controlling everything.
It does make you think twice about how easily we can be manipulated.
About all the hidden agendas out there?
Exactly. And I think that's Klimov's point.
Okay.
He's not just trying to scare people. He's trying to wake us up to make us more aware of these potential forces that are at play.
He's challenging us to think critically, to question authority, and to stand up for our values and our freedoms.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Prince of This World such a powerful book, even if you don't agree with everything he says.
It's a call to action.
It is. And it's a reminder that we're not just passive observers of history, we're active participants.
We have a choice.
We do. And those choices have consequences.
So where does that leave us? Where does that leave our listeners? What do we do with all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway from Prince of This World is this sense of urgency, right? That we're living in this really pivotal moment.
Where choices matter.
Exactly. And that those choices will have a huge impact on the future.
Klimov might not offer any easy answers, but he definitely makes us think.
He challenges us to be more conscious, more aware of the world around us, and to take responsibility for our role in shaping the future.
That's a great place to wrap things up. Prince of This World is a really intense, thought-provoking book, and we hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about, maybe even spark some conversations.
To keep those conversations going, because these are big questions, and they're not going away anytime soon.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, if you made it to the end of the video, thanks so much for listening. If you want to get the book for yourself, use the link in the description. If you're looking to level up your income, schedule a one-on-one with me to see if what I do might be right for you. Remember, like if you like the content and share so we can all become more book buff and life smart.